crack off. We'll crack off. We'll crack on. I knew there was something wrong with that from the very beginning. We'll get going. Thank you. Had my head fully in the recommendation that's coming up. So Councillor McPherson has proposed a recommendation which is now just being tweaked, a couple of 3 words, and we'll be there. But you'll get to talk to it in just a second. Do you want it up before you do? It's coming.
I think it would be better if it was up on the board.
It is coming.
If we waited until that, just save confusion.
Yeah, shouldn't be too far away. No pressure, but we're all looking at you now.
What are you driving to?
Trying to read the handwriting. Who do we blame for that?
At least it's like 10 or 5 years until we sort out where the hell we're going with this whole thing in February next year. So it'll be 2018. We'll make sure that there's in the...
Okay, councillors, so it is up now. Dave, it's up now. So this, unless this gets lost and someone defaults to the other staff recommendation, this is up there, and it's a catch-all. Dave will speak to it. It's a catch-all for the proposals here, noting that we've had a lot of discussion, and there's been a little bit of discomfort around the occupancy lease policy, and so this is relative to that. Would you like to talk to your...
Yeah, I just think there should be one slight, with where it says in A, with term to be determined in February 2018, which is what the meaning of what Helen and I were just talking about.
Okay. Would you like to talk to your recommendation?
Yep. I think there's... all sorts of councillors have got all sorts of questions about different aspects of these, both of the policy and of the individual leases proposed, and some of the implications of theirs. So what I've moved is that we don't approve any, effectively, the import of it is we don't approve any of them at this point, that we bring the policy, including the pricing and types of organisations that are covered, back when the review is due in February 2018, and that at that time we also determine which leases we do want to give and for how long. So it's not kicking any of the organisations out, but it's saying let's.
There's a verb missing in here somewhere. Oh. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. That's Rebecca trying to read our handwriting. And Gary will wordsmith it for us. The idea of this is that we, because of all the discussion and arguments and questions that we've had today, we take a proper look at the policy, see whether it suits this current council's needs, and we determine what's going to happen with these leases in front of us, and presumably any others that might come up in the meantime, in light of that discussion on the policy. That we don't give them now and then have to try and change them later.
Okay.
So I think it's fairly self-explanatory in that sense. I do have problems with this, the groups that are effectively commercial, being able to use this under the guise of being trusts, groups that have good sources of income, being able to use this when I believe the original intention of the policy was to help groups, NGOs that were helping in the community that were just about on the bones of their arse, and that was the reason for us giving an 87.5% discount on commercial lease costs. I think that the policy has started covering groups some of us at least never envisaged would be covered. So, but I'm not trying to say that's right or wrong now. That's my opinion, and I think we test that against the staff report when it comes in February next year.
Okay. Councillor Mallett?
Just a question on
Yep.
Council approves the lease.
My understanding is all of these leases exist up until the 1st of July 2018. So our recommendation can be silent on that, because that will happen anyway. Is that right? Or not?
No.
I think that's actually right. Again,
Actually, now Andy's chucking his head around.
No. So a couple of the groups have current leases and that expire on 30th of June 2018, but a couple of the groups don't. So there's some currently some public space that we manage that the leases would give to another organisation to manage.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood that. So.
Okay, does everyone understand? Any questions before we go to the
I think
debate?
sorry, I think the word, because the staff came the last minute and asked me to change it from it originally said give a 12-month approval. It's now not say that. I think it should read something that council decide on any approval of the leases listed on any approval.
Can I suggest that
Of.
council?
I'll decide on. Okay.
Yeah, I think that covers it. So it's not saying we have to approve them all, but any we do give.
So this is just a deferral till you do the other work.
Until the policy's done,
Okay.
that comes in front of us.
Chair, could I signal an amendment, and that is the staff recommendation?
Okay, thank you.
I'll so move.
There is no. Have you got a seconder for yours, Councillor McPherson, at this point, just so we can get it on the board? Oh, Councillor Taylor, thank you. Second. If you got a seconder, Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you. Thanks, James.
Okay. Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll take, Dave, you've spoken to yours, but I'll give you a minute to...
Oh, no, I'll do it in my right of reply.
Yeah. Will you? Okay, cool. So we're taking the discussion at the same time, right? For the amendment, that's what we do? Yeah, well, that's what was commonly been done here, which is a little bit different from what I've done in the past, but that's cool. So we'll take the comment at the same time. So I'll get the mover of the amendment, Councillor Pascoe, to speak next, and then councillors can debate, and you should indicate in your debate where you're sitting with either of those options to give us a bit of a steer, and then we'll go to voting. Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm reminded of a Crosby, Stills and Nash song called Deja Vu. It says, "We have all been here before." And I'm reminded about the discussion as to why we want to defer this motion, when in fact, if you go back, and with respect to the new councillors, if you go back to the last term, we had exactly the same debate. And I remember it was the St John's Ambulance Community lease in Chartwell, where we debated whether or not they were a commercial organisation versus whether they were a charity. Look, I think I agree with Councillor Dave. I think we should be reviewing the lease policy, but I don't think after staff have been out to market and had some interested tenderers for the leases, that we should leave them high and dry for another 9 to 10 months while we go back and re-look at our policy. So I'm suggesting that we do review that policy in February, but in the meantime we go ahead with business as usual, and that is proceed with the approval of these leases. I'd just like to add perhaps another comment which I don't think got fully answered, and it was in respect to Councillor McPherson's questions, and that is the wording that's likely to go in these leases to protect the current users. And I know that I've fielded calls, particularly in regard to the Fairfield Hall, from a group who felt that they might be disadvantaged if there was one lessee who they had to deal with, if there was a better opportunity for that new lessee to charge a better rent or take away their particular time. So I think that some wording in the policy is necessary. In the lease agreement is necessary, perhaps to grandfather in those groups who have for a number of years had certain slots in some of those facilities which we are now offering to a kind of a head lessee. But look, I'd like to see this being business as usual, but I would welcome a look at the whole lease policy, because I agree with Councillor Dave. I think that there are a number of anomalies there. A number of not-for-profit organisations have morphed into trusts, and they are competing with the private sector, and they are getting the benefit of an 87.5% ratepayer subsidy, which in total adds to it just under $1 million a year. And I think that's a little bit unfair in terms of keeping the marketplace on a level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pascoe. Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to support the motion on this one for selfish reasons, and that's the Frankton plan. I don't want to wait 6 years before one of the actions in that plan is looked at, and appreciate that obviously we've started with a conservation plan for this important heritage area, but I would like to get on with it a little bit sooner. I think this hall is something really precious to the city and one of very, very few, and like my comments on Beale Cottage, I think it needs to be opened up to the public sooner rather than later. So that's my reasons for supporting the motion.
Thank you, Councillor O'Leary. Councillor Casson.
I just want to make clear that the Raukura Hauora O Tainui Trust and Te Whare Atiata are not-for-profit organisations. Every bit of funding they get, they actually put back into their local communities. You know, and they do. You know, unlike some other councillors, I've had some very close associations with both these groups over my time, and I've seen firsthand the essential work these people do in the community. So, look, you've got residents of Enderley and Fairfield and that I would kind of term our ghost residents. Not a lot is done for those people, and they are forgotten about largely when we're doing all sorts of things around the city. And the work that both these organisations do is essential. You know, the work they do with the kids in the community is just phenomenal, and how they do the budgeting advice, just advice to families and everything in the area. They hold anti-domestic violence seminars with people. They educated them on the dangers of gambling and everything else. They do some essential work there. So I am quite comfortable with the amount of rent these people are being charged at the moment, because look, if you make it harder for these people to do their work in the community are the ones that are going to suffer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Paula. Look, I'm certainly not saying there's anything wrong at all with the work these organisations are doing, and Raukura Hauora is doing great work. That's fine. But there's something wrong when an organisation which is being fully funded and well funded by taxpayers through DHB contracts is getting heavily subsidised by ratepayers at the same time. So we're in effect paying twice for that organisation, and I don't think ratepayers would actually thank you for that at all.
Ratepayers there as well. They pay the rates.
Okay, thank you. Have you fit?
There's a decent subsidy there of $13,781 that ratepayers could be getting, and they're not. And for me, this policy was surely not for this type of arrangement. For me, it would have been for organisations that actually need our help. And I don't think Raukura Hauora needs our help. It's getting full funding from the taxpayers. It's perfectly capable of setting up anywhere else. It doesn't need our help. We're supposed to be guardians of ratepayers' money, but it feels to me that we have a policy here that's so loose you could drive a bus through it. You really could. And I think the council must have been in a very benevolent mood when it came up with this policy, and I definitely want to see it reviewed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor King.
So I'm supporting the motion, and what this is about is us looking at the policy, looking at the 5 leases here that we're looking at approving for today, and putting everything on hold, but nobody's going to be thrown out of their lease. People are still staying in the buildings they're in while we look at the policy. and it may be that there's no change once we look at it. We do need to investigate. We do need to look at people who are using buildings for activities that other people in town are in direct competition with, in, for example, dance. And I just think we do need to have a look at it and at the overall picture. So we're looking at the policy itself and just ensuring that it does cover genuine community users, and I support that. Thank you.
Okay, can I just put my view across and then back to the mover? I'm a little bit conflicted in this one because on the one hand, I've got assurances from staff that this is that the recommendation is workable. The policy was going to be reviewed anyway in 2018, as I understand it. Plus, there is the ability for us to move people out within the current policy if we need to. Isn't that right? Yeah. So in that respect, I think where I'm going to land is voting with the amendment, only because I do think these groups deserve some certainty while we get this work done. I would have preferred, however, not for some of these to be 10 years. I would have preferred that Councillor McPherson's recommendation included a term 2 or 3 years that gives people a certain definitive rather than a kind of very open view of the world. I have confidence that staff have made these recommendations in line with the current policy, but I have sympathy with the good points that colleagues have made around some of the potential flaws in the policy for what it's to do for us here today versus when it was created. I do have sympathy for Councillor O'Leary's comments around Frankton Railway Hall, when you've got one policy suggesting you'll do have one use for a building, and then you have something completely contradictory. So I will say that. What I have been thinking about for a little while is how I would like to understand the lay of the land. I have a piece of work done by council, but I don't want to remember, councillors, that LTP's upon us. The staff are already stretched to the very max and beyond as it is, and so now they're going to have to bring this bit of work a little bit further forward than it was planned. It does put some pressure on the organisation. I would like to see, however, a piece of work done at some stage where we could fully understand what the needs of the social, cultural, recreational, environmental trusts and charities are across the city, because in the 10 months I've been here, we've had, bits and pieces of requests, and it's a little bit like all the pieces of a jigsaw, but I haven't seen how it all fits together, and I'd like to understand that so that we can best determine how we meet the needs of all our charitable sectors and community groups, because there seems to me that need is not diminishing, but it's getting bigger. And we do have a role in ensuring that the community can do good things for themselves. And I see this fitting into that. And that's why I'm going to today vote for the amendment and against the recommendation of Councillor McPherson, though he does raise quite a few good points there. Thank you. Right, anybody else who hasn't spoken? Right of reply, Councillor McPherson.
Thanks. I wasn't sure until your last sentence whether you were speaking for the motion or the amendment, because it was a very good speech for the motion, actually. Thank you. Rob started off his speech talking about that it was, for him, it was deja vu. Which reminded me of the great statement by the former US baseballer Yogi Berra, who said it's deja vu all over again. Because, in other words, we're going around in circles, and we are, because we had these sorts of debates in the previous couple of councils, so Rob's right in that respect. But this is a new council, in case he hasn't noticed, and there are people that are new councillors and some old ones that have clearly said there are anomalies in here. Rob himself and Paula have used those words, anomaly. There are anomalies in this. There are some things that they are uncomfortable with. And I sort of say to them, well, if you're uncomfortable with some of the anomalies, why would you not have a good look at the policy in time to clear up those anomalies, which is what the motion says. It says, let's have a good look at the policy, let's see if we've got it right for this council in this time, and then let's go back to these lease proposals and see if they meet our current ideas, not necessarily the ideas from 3 or 4 years ago, which is what they are. I don't think, having been in those previous debates, that anyone would have assumed that the one outcome would be for effectively a private dance company to get an advantage over other effectively private dance companies, some of which are also trusts. In fact, several of them are also trusts who have to pay full commercial rent in other places. Why is council giving that there? Now, that's one anomaly. There are different anomalies to do with prices and to do with qualification for several of the other groups and to do with access from the community as well, even for some of the good groups. I've been involved supporting Te Whare o Te Ata for quite a while and attended AGMs and activities of theirs for a long, long time. And I totally support them, and I think it's good that they're looking at saying to manage that hall, but it's really unclear, and you heard the answers, whether that's going to be at the expense, perhaps, of some other groups in the community. And this gives time for those anomalies or potential anomalies to be ironed out when it comes back to us, so we have a much clearer idea of what we're voting for. I don't think it's a good idea to vote now for these leases not knowing what sort of detail's going to be in them, not having had any negotiation. I don't think staff have done anything wrong. I think the previous policy was a dog. I was going to say a dog's breakfast. It's just a dog. You know, it wasn't well thought through. You know, at the time people thought it was, but it wasn't. Because look at the things that are coming up to us here. I think Raukura Haora is an excellent organisation, and I supported them building their big complex over there, and I've worked with people who set up that organisation for many years. But they have grown out of needing our support, our Rats and Mice Council support, because they now qualify for official, high-level, big-time government health support. And that's far greater test to actually get that. So why are we not saying, okay, you've outgrown the start-up needs that this council traditionally supports, you're getting this sort of support from the government. Let's go back and support some of the other new groups to start. So I'm concerned that we're treating them like we're always going to keep giving them this support, and I think that's that's not a community development method. That's a charity method actually, and I don't think we should be in that game. I think we should be much more strategic about who we're supporting and when. But I'm going to have that argument in February next year when the policy proposals come back to us, and I'll win or lose, and I'll go along with whatever comes out of that, and so should all of these groups and any other groups. I agree with Paula, we don't pay much attention, and certainly not in the strategic way, to the type of support we give our community. And I think to use the word business as usual, which has been used a couple of times here, is wrong. We're not in the game of business as usual anywhere else. We're looking at everything with a set of fresh eyes. So should we be doing in this area. And here's an opportunity to do that. It doesn't kick anyone out on the street. It gives time for decisions to be made and arrangements made. And that's what we're trying to do with the resolution. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, councillors. Some good debate there, so now we'll go to the vote. We're voting. Which comes first? Vote the amendment's being put first, so you're... Sorry, get my head around that. The amendment, we're voting on the amendment. For the amendment. That's right. For the amendment. Just in general terms. On, thank you. Yeah, we're voting on the amendment. Thank you.
The amendment is lost.
Okay, thank you. So now we're voting on the recommendation.
Wouldn't it have been a song you would have played on your radio station?
Okay, so everybody voted? We're waiting on someone, are we? Okay.
The motion is carried.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Thank you for the quality of debate, and we'll move on. So now we're on item 10, I think. Hang on. Yeah. And Helen's going to make some suitable introductions here. Councillors?
So I just want to introduce, for those of you who haven't... Is that on? Oh, sorry, thanks. Those of you who haven't met Lisa Topkov, she is our sponsorship and partnerships manager. So Lisa has collated, along with Nick, the information for this report. And just to outline that this report has come to the committee as a request from a briefing. So it is an information report to enable discussion around applications to gaming trusts. So we're going to take the report as read, and Lisa and Nick are available to answer questions.
Okay, so we are assuming that everyone's read everything. There are no points, special points to be raised, so we'll go straight into the questions. Discussion, hang on, I'll just put my discussion thing on. Mayor King.
I have a motion to put up.
Okay, so have you provided the motion?
Yeah, it's all ready to go.
Okay. Do you want me to put it up prior to questions?
Well, I could talk to it then if...
Yeah, so we're just taking general questions first, but we'll put it up just so that it is there for people's consideration. You can be giving it half a thought, and we'll come back to you, and Mayor Andrew, for your comment on it. Are there any general questions? Oh, yes, I see I have now. Thank you. Councillor Pascoe.
Yes, just one very quick question. Paragraph 35 details there the funding that we've had over the last 7 years from gaming trusts. Has the City Council ever been declined in an application that we have made during that period to any of the gaming trusts?
Yes, we have. So since 2010, we've applied 6 times to various gaming trusts that have been declined.
On six occasions we've been declined, and we've
2010.
been. What have we got there? We've got 3,
7.
6, 8. We've got 8 there that have been approved.
7 approved, and there's been 6 declines in that same period.
Okay. Oh, yes, 6. Yep. Okay. Thank you. That's my question.
Councillor McPherson, apologies.
Sorry, I'm just... That was part of my question. I'm just, what sort of... were they the same trusts that we applied to that declined us, or was there sort of one trust that regularly never gave us anything, or what?
So they varied. So Lion Foundation, Southern Trust, NZCT, and Grassroots, and Sky City.
Oh, yes, so it was total mixture.
A total mixture over the years, yep.
Can I ask sorry, have you finished, Councillor McPherson? Yep. Thank you. A question from me, because now that I sit as your representative on the Rotatuna Sports Facility, that has received funding from organisations associated with gambling just recently. Could you tell me, I haven't brought it with me, sorry Nick, but can you kind of just tell us a little bit about where that's come from?
I apologise, I don't have exact figures on me, but the Rotatuna Indoor Recreation Centre Trust has received funding from Grassroots, and there's Trillion. Yeah, so I would need
someone else as well.
Yeah.
NZCT.
Oh, NZCT as well. Yes.
Okay. Do you rough ballpark figure of how much?
I wouldn't feel comfortable giving a rough ballpark on that, but I'm happy to check and report back. Can
you just describe to councillors what kinds of things that money is being used for?
The report is about funding that the council has received. That's an independent community trust deliberately set up. So why are we asking questions about an outside
I'm interested in how the council community benefit or otherwise from that, and I was aware that a facility that we have shared use of has been able to use some, and you can have your view later as well. And
well, it just seems out of order to me. We could be asking a Meteor Trust or Riverlea or...
Well, I don't consider it so I'm just going to finish that question briefly because I do think it's relevant. It's been used for things like...
It's contributed towards the fit-out of the recreation centre, so that's the basketball hoops, other multi-purpose...
Nets, yeah. All those sorts of things.
Yeah, and major, the dividing net separating the courts. That's what it's gone towards.
All right, thank you. Any other, Councillor Mallett, thank you.
Would it be right to say that if the gambling trusts hadn't given money to many community organisations within the community, that a number of those community organisations would be coming to council for money?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear the last.
That if the gambling trust had not given money to a number of community organisations which are not council-owned organisations or facilities, often they are council partnership type things like the Rotorua thing, and there's a myriad of them out there, that if the money hadn't come from the gambling trust, those people would just turn around and start applying to us anyway.
I'm not sure that we could comment or speculate on where enough funding may go if it wasn't to these trusts.
So Helen's got a comment to make on that.
I mean, it would be hard to answer that specifically, but generally,
just trying to make sure everyone understands that
generally most community groups rely on a number of funding agencies. It's not one or other, so it's usually part of a funding strategy that they'll leverage off. So, there isn't a straight answer to your question because they go to whoever they can.
So
generally.
would it be correct to say that, these community organisations, footy clubs, all sorts of things, netball clubs, they apply for funding to council, to the government, to gambling trusts, to philanthropic trusts, all over the place. And if
correct, so they apply to funders,
and the gambling trusts provide millions of dollars into that.
Correct. So
pool.
the funders will have a set of criteria, and applicants will match their application to the criteria that is advertised, and what the priorities are. The funders will have priorities at different times, and then it's a matter of allocating accordingly. And looking at the allocation from gaming trusts, they generally apportion a certain amount of small grants to community groups, and then they'll have a larger kind of grants and kind of medium and large. So
big facility type grants.
Yeah, so they'll have certain priorities and certain criteria across different projects and size of grant.
Thank you.
Just councillors, for your information before I carry on, I have asked that an amendment be put from myself. It's going to go up there just so you can see what the thinking is around it. Haven't got a seconder at this point in time, of course, but neither has the recommendation. We'll carry on with the questions and we'll get to this, but it's just so it's transparent that sits behind. Can you see it?
I have another question. Couple of questions. Sorry.
Yep, I'm coming. I'm sorry. I'm coming to it. Councillor McPherson.
Sorry, I didn't have these ready before. When you looking on page 50, the 385,000 of grants since 2010, how many grants have projects in these same categories received from non-gambling organisations during the same period? Like the Vibrant Hamilton Trust, the Donny Trust, Trust Waikato, etc., etc.
Yeah, I don't exactly have that information here, but I can tell you if we look at, say, the destination playgrounds, usually it is a mix. So I would say probably about 40 to 50% would be aimed at gaming and the
Can I challenge you on that? Because we've given out more money to council projects with Vibrant Hamilton Trust in that period than 60%, way more. That the percentage of Pokie Trust money just for the projects you're talking about will be a lot less. If, the money from Vibrant Hamilton Trust, and I know some has come in from other trusts. I mean, Donny Trust, for instance, has made a promise, but on some money for the river thing. I'm just trying to get a comparison because this question was asked in light of our overall projects, and the original report had a list of projects and how much you could see that some of the grants were from gaming trusts and some were from other LNG and all sorts of things.
It would help us if you can form the question and then maybe.
I just thought we'd get
because I'm
sorry, from what I've seen in the past, 40 to 50% is way wrong, and I don't blame Lisa because.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. I'm just not clear on the question. Sorry.
Okay, we'll start again. See the list on page 50. Okay. We've got 385,000 from Pokie Trusts towards those projects.
Yep.
what did we get from non-pokey trusts
Okay,
towards projects, not just compared with the successful ones, but also the unsuccessful ones. There's 13, in other words, that Lisa's talked about in the same basket. I'm not after the exact dollars, but
If we look at Dominion Playground, I've got some figures here, and Well Energy Trust provided $45,000, Grassroots provided $80,000, Vibrant Hamilton 100, and Sky City 25,000. So 145 from non-gaming and just over 100 from gaming.
and some of the other ones. I mean, it's a bit hard to actually compare, to have a real look what's going on here if we're just looking about gaming. We were trying to get the picture of gaming as part of the overall picture. Is it a
Right,
big,
okay.
small, or
Yeah, I mean, we do have that
half?
information, we don't have that here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
and I
I've-
can absolutely
Spreadsheet.
prepare some information and bring
Get
that
the
back to you.
Yeah, just we've got to make a decision today. That's all right. I'm not blaming you. It's hard to compare. Okay, the second thing is on the Class 4 gaming policy. I don't know whether, Nick, you want to answer this. If we had a genuine sinking lid policy, what would that look like in terms of our regulations? Who, you know, would that have been dropping our number of pokey machines in the city or number of pokey bars faster, or what would that have done going forward? What would it look like? You know, the effect of it, not the wording.
I would need to ask the GM strategy and communications to answer that question.
Yep, so if we had a true sinking lid policy, then we would have a policy that didn't contain a relocation policy as part of it. So that would mean that no Class 4 gambling venue could relocate. So at the moment, the policy allows for venues outside of permitted areas to relocate to within the permitted areas, and it allows for some limited relocation from within to within those permitted areas. So the conditions by which you can locate from within to within include if the building that they're currently in becomes earthquake prone or significantly damaged, or if the landlord won't renew the lease for the lessee. So those are the conditions on which people can move from within to within at the moment. So if we were to have a policy which was the most extreme of this, so there is, I guess you would call that probably a partial sinking lid. If we were to have kind of a true or sort of most extreme version of the sinking lid policy, then you wouldn't allow any of those relocations.
And how many of the moves would have been caught that we've had would have been caught?
I'm just wondering if we're going off topic here. This report is about the distribution of gaming funds, not about the gaming policy.
I'm sorry, look at the attachments on page 51, Class 4 gambling venue policy, Rob.
Yeah, but the whole report is about the funding of what funding. If you read pages 47 to 51, it's all about the funding that council receives.
I'm sorry, when we receive
okay, hang on.
policy in here.
Hang on, Dave. Let me roll on the point of order. I agree with. I see where you're coming from, Rob, but I actually won't uphold that point of order because I think we've been given two sets of recommendations that clearly talk about the policy itself.
But they're off point also, Chair.
I think they are relative in that this document itself does talk about that in passing. It mentions it on a number of occasions, and I guess some councillors are putting more weight on that or trying to elevate the importance or the interconnection. So I think it's a good debate to have, and the decision will be exercised in the vote. That's how I see it.
I mean, I understand Rob's point, but because it was listed in here, I thought, well, I want to ask some questions on it.
I thought it was there as a matter of information rather than it being relevant to the report, but you've ruled, so we've
got recommendations on the board that contain it, so I don't think I can...
So, look, the only follow-on question I want to ask Sean was whether he had an idea of how many pokey bars that would have affected had we in the last few years. Is there any information on that? if we'd had the full sinking lid as opposed to the what you call partial sinking lid?
I don't have kind of the information from me, Dave, but I've got some sort of limited information. So I'm aware that so within the central city, I think what is now the quadrant, or I'm not sure if it was previously or is currently the quadrant, relocated within the central city. So they wouldn't have been permitted to do that under our policy prior to September last year. So we amended the policy. So we adopted the policy. We adopted a new policy in April last year, which didn't allow for relocation within the permitted area. Then we amended that policy in September to allow some limited relocation. Okay, so if that one's a bit of an anomaly because the DIA, the Department of Internal Affairs, ultimately ruled that them moving didn't represent a change of location because it was the DIA essentially overruled us and decided that was essentially the same location.
Okay, so we have just a policy. So hang on a minute, excuse me. Just taking up the point that Rob does raise, that I think it's good to get the factual information. We're not reviewing the policy here at this time, but what you can see is the recommendations are looking at reviewing, and that would be the time when you drill into those questions.
I'm not trying to drill into the particular thing. I'm trying to drill into the policy, and I just want to check our policy, no matter which way it goes, can be overruled by the DIA. Is that what I'm taking from what? So I'm not asking about this. I don't care about the specific bar. I care about what the sort of effect the policies have.
Yeah, it's a complicated question. I think without going into too much detail because I don't have it here, but the DIA essentially issue operator licences. So they issue the licence to the operator who runs the machines. We issue permits to the venue. Which is a slightly separate thing. However, the DIA on this occasion have essentially made a ruling that that location is the same venue, and thereby that, in a legal sense, would apply to us. So how we assess venues.
So in that case, a physically different venue was ruled by the DIA as the same venue.
In effect, yeah.
Okay, thanks. So that's logical.
Okay, so if we can stick with questions now to the partnership and sponsorship, and then we will get into the debate, because there will be people with some historical knowledge that some of the new councillors, including myself, do not have. Is yours a question, Mayor Andrew? Yeah, thank you.
Sean.
Yeah.
You brought up the DIA ruling.
Yes.
I understand there's been an official information request on that subject.
There was, yes.
I wasn't going to bring this up, but you brought it up, so we might as well go there. So what policy were we under out of the 3 policies that we went through in the last 3 years while we pushed for more permissive policies? What policy were we under at the time when that building burnt down?
So the policy, the policy that it was in effect at the time was the one that was adopted in April 2016.
Was that a sinking lid policy?
A variation of. So that allowed venues to locate from outside to within the area, but not from within to within.
So this council at the time understood that those machines couldn't be relocated under the policy that we had at the time.
This might not be information that could be supplied.
So are you asking? What's the question? That
this
council, under the policy at the time.
The last council understood at the time, when the DIA overrode our policy, that couldn't happen.
So I assume that is what the council understood, yes, because that is what the policy said.
So why didn't that come back to this council to make a decision on? Why weren't we informed until today when I first found out about it? Why didn't the council of the day get the opportunity to make a decision on whether they wanted to challenge that or not?
I'm not sure. I couldn't answer that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mallett.
Hang on, I've got other questions.
Sorry.
Well, sorry, on that, can we get I mean, Sean's not sure, appreciate that, but can we get an answer from the CEO? Can sort an answer?
Well, the CEO's not here. If he arrives, we can, but...
No, I'm talking, we need surely a question asked of a member of management that can't be answered because lack of information in the room can still get answered as soon as possible afterwards.
I agree.
So we had a very tight policy at the time. It came back again to this council and a more permissive policy came in. But at the time, when that business burnt down, we had a very tight policy in place where we had a no relocation policy in place.
Just to be clear, you could have relocated from outside a gambling area to within a gambling area at that time.
Is that what happened?
No, so you couldn't relocate from within to within.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the last few questions.
So,
No.
at the moment, do we have a true sinking lid policy right now after the changes we've had since that building burnt down?
The definition of sinking lid is open to interpretation.
Do we have a true sinking lid policy right now?
We don't have the most extreme version of sinking lid, no.
So who sets how many poker machines can go in Hamilton?
So it's determined by the existing number. So
but who sets it? Who's the regulatory authority?
The DIA. The DIA issues operator licences for the number of machines, and then we issue permits to the venues to operate within that.
So we issue. What do we do? What's our role?
So we issue permits to venues. So we allow venues to operate machines.
So who sets the policy for how many machines you can have? Who sets the policy for where they can be, and who sets the policy of whether they can relocate?
We set the policy for if they can relocate. However, that's within the the bounds of the legislation. So we can't, for example, we couldn't have a policy that said we don't want any more gaming machines in Hamilton City.
With all due respect, Mr Mayor, with all due respect, your questions are very important, but I think that comes within the review that you're seeking in your recommendation, and I don't think we're going to be well served at trying to get half bits of information about a review of the policy here today. We're just here to talk about the partnership and sponsorship. So
these questions are very pertinent to where I'm heading, which is what's on the board. So if you just let me finish, you'll see where I'm going.
Right.
So Sean, this council decides whether machines can relocate or not?
Yes.
So we're the regulator in that case?
Yes.
And when these machines move, does money change hands? Do they get traded as a commodity?
I don't believe so.
They get given away, do they? From one venue to another?
No, so I'm afraid I'm just not sure of the answer to that question.
I think I know the answer to that. The machines are owned by the trusts, and so when the machines move, the trust won't. There's no sale to another trust. They just move from venue A to venue B, owned by grassroots trust or. Yeah, so the ownership, my knowledge is the movement from a location to another location doesn't change unless sometimes a trust can, and the trusts go around and tout for business from the pub. So a publican can take his machines from the mandate of one trust to another trust, and that situation is
allowance, not the machines physically.
Okay, so that's been made clear.
So we've established that we're the regulator?
We're one of, yes.
And do we apply for funds from the takings of poker machines?
Yes, I think that's contained in the report.
So we're the benefactor. We are one of the benefactors.
Yeah, as I said, I think that's contained in the report that we've got in front of us today.
So this council's doing the job of regulating and benefiting. We're the gamekeeper and the poacher.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a statement.
So how do you think that looks? What do you think the perception out there is of that?
I think it's a little bit unfair to put that on one staff member, Mayor Andrew, but you can certainly talk to that in your in your movers debate.
Thank you, General Manager.
Okay, are there any other questions? If not, we will move into the...
Oh,
No, I've lost him, sorry. Gary, yes, go.
me, happening again. Okay, am I correct in this, that community organisation, so on page 49, I'm correct in saying that over just the last financial year, $7.3 million was distributed from gambling trusts to 422 organisations within Hamilton.
So this was.
Oh, sorry, there you are.
So this report is based on the 15-16 financial year.
Yep.
But they've distributed 420 grants. So that could mean that more than one community group could be getting more than one grant.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So of that 422, some of them could be getting more than one grant, but the total of all the grants that those 422 organisations got is $7,358. That's just within Hamilton.
For Hamilton-based,
Okay.
yeah.
Is there an alternative for those organisations to get funding? What are the other alternatives they've got?
There is a pool of funders. So there was a report put out by Well Energy, I think, a few years ago, and they put out a report showing the trends of the pool of funding, so to speak, and they did focus it on the Waikato region, but it did state that there probably was about 27 million going into the Waikato.
Inclusive of the...
Including gaming.
So the gaming trusts are roughly a quarter.
I would say...
I mean, this is very rough figures,
so
but 7 out of 28 million.
This is Hamilton-based, so if you go through the DIA...
Oh, okay, these guys are Waikato.
So the DIA put out a report, and there is probably about 12 million from gaming trusts combined going into the Waikato. So if you compare the 12 million
okay, so
to
focusing
27,
back on Hamilton
about
then.
40, about
okay,
40%.
sorry. Okay, so focusing on Hamilton, the Waikato region gets 27 million roughly,
Yeah,
including this.
including gaming trusts.
So if we, I don't know how much you discount back to try and get from a Waikato figure to a Hamilton figure, and we're guessing,
hard to do.
Okay, so it could be that the gambling trusts, in fact, are providing 30 to 40%
Potentially.
of the funding to community groups within Hamilton.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just a follow-up question on that, if I may. Given that the 7.3 million that went to community organisations and sporting organisations and so forth in Hamilton in that last period, listed on page 49 that Gary's just talked about, and given that the percentage of money a trust is required to give back to the community is 42% minimum, would it then be correct that in order to give back the 7.3 million, they extracted from the community about 18 million?
Some people win. Some people win, Dave. Not everyone loses when they're on these things.
That would be the assumption.
Actually, if you knew the thing,
wise.
everyone eventually loses. And that's not morally speaking, that's...
Just like Lotto.
That would be the assumption, yeah.
There.
So
you
so
did
my
your maths.
understanding is the gross income is about 23 before,
23 million.
before GST.
So even if you... 23 million gross income to Hamilton, 42% of that's the minimum that's required to give back. 42% of that is about 9.5 million, but they actually only gave back 7.3 million. So there's a don't worry about the missing
Is
millions.
this a question,
Million, it's the
Dave?
missing millions.
Question?
Eh?
We're still on questions?
Well, yeah, I am. I'm trying to find out how 7.3 million is 42% of 23 million. And it seems like there's a missing millions around. Sandra,
So-
have you got the missing millions?
Is that a question?
Gaming trusts, although they are required to give back minimum 40% to the community, there is no regulation for them to give it back to where the funds were raised.
Oh, okay.
So it is something
Gotcha.
that the trusts do themselves, and they do try to give back as much as they can to the community where it was raised. There is that discrepancy where they do give it to regional and national organisations that do work within the Hamilton
Good point,
area.
Lisa. So just getting this right, 23 million out of Hamilton during that period, 7.3 million back into Hamilton and at least another 2.2 million, say, somewhere else, not in Hamilton, but taken out from Hamilton.
So it could be going to national organisations like, say, St John, who work across the country but still have a presence in Hamilton, and so it
or
could
to
be
the Grammar
used
Rugby
for
Club in
Hamilton.
Auckland, which gets a pretty hefty amount, or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, we've had a lot of questions. Okay, you got one more question?
One more question, and it's relating to what Dave was going at. I mean, it is correct, isn't it, that these guys are extremely tightly regulated, audited, and hence you get people caught every now and then who have been trying to commit frauds on these things, and that it would probably be, along with the sale of liquor, be one of the most regulated parts of New Zealand, the New Zealand economy, in terms of money that get paid to publicans for the rent and the maintenance of the machines, the distribution, any conflicts of interest where if grants are paid to people who are attached to the gambling trust, all that sort of stuff. It's extremely tightly regulated.
Would you agree?
Yeah, that's exactly what I had started with. I'm not a novice, Dave. I know how to do
so the question is, thank you.
Am I correct in saying?
Yeah.
They are
Okay,
well
thank you.
regulated.
So we're getting almost into debate. In fact, we've been there for a while now, so we will move to debate. Pardon? Yeah, no, that's right. Thank you for reminding me. I'm getting there. So I need a seconder for Andrew, Councillor Casson, and I'm not sure if anybody's interested in seconding me, but I'm going to second. Thank you, Councillor Pascoe. And Helen would like to say something before we get into discussion.
So just in your agenda, there is a external funding policy attached, which was unfortunately an older policy. So we've handed out the newer policy, which was just to reflect the new committee structure, and the resolution reflects the clause numbers in the external funding policy that's been handed out. So.
And Services Committee, is that a police initiative or a spelling mistake?
Spelling mistake, don't worry.
Don't worry, I'm being glib.
We'll sort that out.
Okay, so let's move on. Mayor Andrew, you're the mover of the recommendation. Would you like to speak?
Yes. So be under no illusion, poker machines cause harm. They cause immense harm. They are the biggest. Well, yeah, they are a big causer of harm in our community, and we've had people sit here and tell us the harm in the last 3 years in the last council that poker machines have done to their families, to their partners, and to their loved ones, their children, and the upheaval that it's caused in their homes. We're the regulator, Hamilton City Council. This table here sets the rules, and our staff regulate these machines. And is it right that we also apply back for funds from these machines? We're the big player, we have the staff, we know how to apply for funds, we come in, scoop large amounts of money. We can see that in the next paper coming up, $120,000 we're applying for. You've got small clubs, rugby clubs, small groups who apply for small amounts, 10, 20, 30,000, 15,000, and they don't have the skill to be able to put up the really big applications and the good applications. This money, be aware, if this council doesn't apply for the funding, if we're not a benefactor, the money's still going to come back into this community, into Hamilton's community. The money's not going to be lost, it's still going to go around, but it's not going to come into projects that generally are funded through other ways of funding, not through the proceeds of poker machines. So my main point and my main concern is, firstly, I think we need to look at the policy and the fact that this table, there could be a temptation that we put up an easier policy to bring more machines in, to not have a sinking lid, to have more machines stay in the system, which of course brings more money in, which then leads to a position where there's more money for us to apply back for. I'm not saying that's happening, I'm just saying that we need to shut the door on that to stop it from happening. The temptation could be there, and this has a potential to lead through to soft corruption. Soft corruption isn't illegal corruption, but it's where decisions are made to benefit our own organisation through, in this case, a looser policy. So this is just tightening these things up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor King, and as the mover of the amendment, I'll say a few things too. What I'm trying to achieve there, can you please roll mine up? What I'm trying to achieve there is that we receive the report. I support a review at a timely time of the gambling policy for all the reasons that lots of you have spoken to this morning in your questions. Having said that, I think the external funding policy could form part of the 10-year plan discussions. At that time, it makes most sense when everything's coming to the table at the same time. I don't, with all due respect, Mayor Andrew, I don't agree with you that we're the regulators. I think what we are the policy writers. We as a council can and do leverage good things out of the money that we get, which does benefit our wider community. My concern is if we put a stop to this right now, rather than phase in a stronger policy and drive the need for gambling related funds away in the long term, which I fully support, we'd have to find some other way. You know, the next item's about a playground, that would disappear straight away, that money. The nets, the volleyball nets, would not have been purchased for the Rototuna Indoor Recreation Centre, or the basketball nets, or the whiteboards, and a number of other things. I'm speaking.
No, I'm entitled to make a point of order.
Yep.
And then
You
the
will
chair.
have a conflict of interest for all of us.
Yeah.
And the point of order is you're talking about things that a non-council organisation has applied for. The motion and this other motion do not apply to the trust managing the Rototuna Recreation Centre, and it's out of order to refer to them.
I think I've ruled on that before when it came up.
No, hang on. You don't have the right to interrupt a point of order.
Carry on.
Okay. I would like you to rule as to whether the Rototuna Recreation Centre trust that runs that place is covered by either the motion or the amendment. Maybe I'd like advice from the governance advisor.
Well, you're welcome to do that, but in speaking to it, I'm talking about community benefit. If it pleases you more, I can remove it and talk about something else. But what I like playgrounds where we have absolutely, without doubt, got children playing today as a result of those applications. I'd like not to rely on those applications. I'd like to find other sustainable ways of meeting the community needs. I really would. I'd like those communities to be self-funding as well and sustainable. But we know in this point in time they're not, and we know very well because we've got the LTP coming up, and we know that our community needs are going to be in competition with things like growth. So if we don't go after the fund where we can find it in the short term, we have to find the money somewhere else. What do? Do we not do those community assets? Do we delay them even further? Do we delay the pace of growth? Do we say, oh, we can't afford to grow as fast as we would like to while we're putting some money back into the community? And I'm just raising those because those are legitimate conversations that we do need to have. And that is why I've proposed this, so that we can move forward with a policy, which is what most councillors seem to want. And we can also look at this in context of the long-term plan, which is where the rubber hits the road about what we will or will not fund going forward. Okay, so Councillor Casson.
I may have an answer for the quadrant actually, because they were over in the building where the bank is now, and the bank didn't renew their lease. They had to move. Mm-hmm. That's why they moved across the road. But yeah. Putting that aside, I'm voting for the motion, obviously, because I'll second it. But look, point C in that motion is really important. We shouldn't be just reviewing that about the external applying for funding from gambling trusts. We should be stopping it. We are a a regulator and a profiter from that money. Now, anybody who bothered to turn up last year when they had the screenings of Kaching Pokie Nation around before we had the elections would see the sort of misery and how those machines are geared towards you will eventually lose. You know, now it's not a fair. Those machines aren't fair on anybody. But look, we as a council are actually profiting from our own residents' miseries and their addictions, because gambling is an addiction. So you may have children playing on playgrounds that we've built with some funding from gambling, but those same children are going home. Some of the children are going home to families and households to no food because mum and dad have gambled away the money. So that's a double-edged sword there. They can play in our playgrounds, but they're going home to nothing. Okay, so it is an addiction, and I think we should be very careful about this. I remember a few years ago we had police sporting teams that I was actually part of as well, that applied for funding and sponsorship from the liquor industry. Now, they used to do that, but that's not allowed anymore because the police are they regulate the liquor industry and they can't profit from it. So that was stopped, and I see this as exactly the same. So I'd like to see our funding from the Pokie stop now, not just review it. Thank you.
And that reminded me, I forgot a whole part of mine, but never mind. Carry on. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chair Paula. It was a wee while ago, I was standing for Well Trust against Councillor Mallett, and the crux of the argument we had there was Councillor Mallett's group were essentially saying, rightio, with Well Trust, we'll get rid of community grants now. Our argument in opposition to that was that if you get rid of the community grants from the likes of the Well Trust, the community isn't big enough to sustain anything other than grants from gambling trusts, and that would be a terrible thing. The community agreed entirely, and we whooped them. No, he won a different victory. And the bottom line is, I think we all agree, it's dirty money. It's dirty money, and we've become dependent on it. As Councillor Mallett pointed out, with the huge amounts of monies that are going into sports clubs, and it's very tempting money. Oh, it's lovely lolly, but it's dirty money. And we have a very real opportunity, councillors, not only to fix a foul situation, but to attain an even better place in our community. Just looking this morning at some statistics from the Problem Gambling Foundation's own website, it's interesting, just as a point of information, in wealthy areas there's one pokie machine for 465 people. In poorer areas there's one pokie machine for 75 people. The primary modes of problem gambling in this country go like this: 9% lotteries, 10% racing, 10% casinos, 9% casino pokies, 50% of referrals to the Problem Gambling Foundation come from non-casino pokies. Make no mistake, we are funding our community on addiction, and that is a terrible, terrible thing. We have an opportunity here to make a statement. Every person with a gambling addiction affects between 5 to 10 other people in the community. It is a problem. Now, this council, I've been really impressed, especially with the last council, took some great bold stands on antisocial addictive behaviour type legislation with the psychoactive substances work. That was stunning work, stunning work. Massive clap for that. It was a nationwide leading policy. I was really impressed, and boy oh boy I talked about it on the radio. Very vocal in my praise, as was the community. It was fantastic. We took a moral stance with the psychoactive substances work. Not long ago we took a moral stance with Easter trading. So I am imploring this council to make a moral and brave stance here today. At the moment, we're not only enabling problem gambling, we're tacitly encouraging it. But we can't be unreasonable, as Chair Southgate has just suggested. What I would suggest is we do have a good, strong, definite, no holes in the lid, sinking lid policy, but retain the community contribution at its existing level, not percentage, dollar amount. So what happens is as the lids sink, the same money goes into the community, but we put the community on notice there and then that this won't last. This is going to become uneconomic for pubs to have pokies or for establishments to have pokies. You better start looking for donations elsewhere. Now, make no mistake, this community is not stupid. This community came up with a Momentum Foundation out of nothing effectively because it realised that philanthropy had to come from somewhere else. And it's a great foundation. We're looking at a theatre with this foundation 5 years after it started. The community can survive without gaming trusts. It can. Give them some credit. Secondly, I would also support us somehow regulating that a larger percentage of the gambling money goes into the Problem Gambling Foundation. I've often said that lotto is a tax on people that can't do maths. Let's be a forward-thinking council that cares. I fully support this this motion from Mayor King.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor McPherson.
Thanks very much. Look, for many of the reasons, well, all the reasons that Councillor Bunting said, plus some more, pokie machines cause harm in the community and have been doing that ever since 1990 when Peter Dunn, as Internal Affairs Minister in the Labor government, just looking at someone here at the time that was around then, actually signed them in, and he attended that Minister of Internal Affairs then attended a conference a few years later and proudly held up a pen. It was a gambling industry conference. Said, "This is the pen I signed the regulation to allow pokie machines into this country." What a guy! And that was 27 years ago. And there's been harm caused ever since, and lives lost, and families lost, and homes lost during that time. We've been given what I'd call a half-assed ability to actually deal with the problem by putting things like the sinking lid on. We can't get rid of a single existing pokie bar. The best we can do, Sean described it as the most extreme. I hardly think it's extreme, but the best we can do is to say, you're stuck where you are, don't try and move because you won't be allowed to reopen the pokie machines. That's a sinking lid policy. It doesn't mean to say it's a responsible community policy. It just means to say that's the best you can do. Now, look, there's two sorts of addiction problems in the community. There's the addiction problem that Mark talked about, and the other one he referred to a bit more, and James did as well. Community organisations and the council to a certain extent are addicted to gambling too. We're addicted to the proceeds of gambling, and that wouldn't be so bad if all of the proceeds of gambling were actually going back into the communities they came from. But as well as being ripped out of the poor communities, and Mark talked about these figures there, and distributed into the wealthier communities, you'll look at the Auckland figures, they're shocking. South Auckland Trust ripped them out of South Auckland and give them to Carlton Grammar Rugby Club and other clubs up in central Auckland, Parnell and places like that. Look at the figures that are around there. But as well as that sort of thing, in Hamilton alone, the facts are that at least $2 million a year is taken out of the poor communities and given to somewhere else that's not even Hamilton. It's not even redistribution between Norton or Enderley and Rototuna. It's redistribution out of Hamilton into who knows where, somewhere around the country, possibly to that West Auckland yachting club that was used to shout some people to the America's Cup in San Diego in 1994, which someone came a crop over when they eventually found out about. That was 50 grand, I think, from one of the pokie trusts for that. There's a whole lot of rorts going on like that. When they used to say New Zealand had a clean green image, that was before pokie machines came along and all the temptation for corruption that they afforded and was used. James amused me when James talked about the police no longer allowed their social activities not allowed to be funded by this pokie machine money. Before I recall, shortly after the casino opened, that a particular police inspector was found to have won 2 jackpots in Sky City Casino in his bloody lunchtimes while in uniform on duty. That's how addicted he was. Those sort of extremes have been. We've sort of said, oh well, look, we better clean it up. Those sort of things have been cleaned up a bit, but we've still got the underlying problem. When I talk about community groups and sporting clubs being addicted, I used to sit, when I first got on council, on an organisation called the Hillary Grant Scheme, where small grants went to for a set of uniforms for a kid's soccer club and that. but the Labor government at the time, and I'm not sure whether the ex-member present was in there in the early 90s, but I think he may have been, actually disbanded that grant, and the minister in charge at the time, one Trevor Mallard, actually got up and said the gaming trusts have now filled that gap. We don't need to fund that anymore. That is why we're pulling out that fund. Thank you, Labor government at the time. You know, and the current government continued that. So, look, I'm going to wind up by saying Gary's right. It does help some in the community. That's the 30% maybe who get that sort of funding. It doesn't help the other 70% who don't get the funding, who have the funding taken off them. And why should the council make it even worse for those community groups? It's not actually helping the withdrawal, it's actually making us addicted on top of the community, on top of the individuals. Let's grow some and actually do something about this situation as much as we're able to.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you, Chair. Look, today's report and this debate is about funding from gaming trusts. And I do say again, I think we've got well and truly off point in our discussion around this. It's been suggested that we scoop large amounts of this money that would otherwise be available to the community. When I look at paragraph 35 and divide that by the 7 years, it's an average of $55,000 a year that we have taken from what seems to be an average annual pool of about $7.4 million. So I would suggest to you that our ability to affect gambling policy on picking up 0.7 of 1% of funds that are made available to groups within the community is not material and is not in any way significant. All of the projects that directly benefit the community, we might not have been able to provide destination playgrounds had it not been for these funding, had not been for this funding. And indeed, you only have to take children or grandchildren to the destination playgrounds to see the varied people who are making use of that. So there is a direct benefit, not just to a few, but to many, from the small amounts of funding that this council has picked up from these gaming funds. Look, it's baloney to suggest that we are denying other groups from getting support. As I mentioned, 0.7 of 1% of the total funding has on average come back to us over the last 6 years. We rank alongside all of the other applications, and as has already been mentioned in the report today, we have lost on as many applications that we've submitted that we've actually been successful on. So we don't win every case, despite the fact that some around this table might think we're a much more well-oiled machine to present applications than some of the smaller groups might be. I think a review of our gambling policy should always be a work in progress, but I think that it should have its rightful place at an appropriate time, and I don't think we should be making very sudden decisions as is envisaged in the motion under Part C. I think we should let the gambling venue policy take its course, that it is up for review, and when it is, it will be appropriately reviewed. So for this reason, I will be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to support the motion or the amendment. I'm confused by the amendment. I understand the motivation behind the motion because I sat here. I've sat here for 10 years and listened to different sides of the debate and have sympathy and agree with many parts of the motion. But my caution, I guess, is in the last 13 years, this policy has been reviewed 8 times. So that's pretty much every year and a half we're looking at this policy. Now that tells me, when I listen to the comments around the table and agree with every concern around harm, that tells me that what we're doing is just not working, but I don't know that it's ever going to work unless anybody is bold and brave enough to actually come up with an idea that says, actually, we're not going to have any gambling sites in this city, because the comments, the policy and the reviews of the policy aren't really going to match the sentiments around the table. And I was very supportive when Councillor McPherson years ago first raised sinking policy. So I hear the concerns and where the motion's driving at. But, you know, 8 times reviewing this policy, the last one only being last year, doing the same thing, you're going to get the same outcome. This is, I didn't know it was actually Peter Dunn. That's interesting, since he was the gentleman that gave us psychoactive substances as well. So I'm not too sure what that says about his party's policies, Councillor Mallett. But I hear the frustration, and I'm not sure in my years around the table whether it's which one it is, whether it is political dissatisfaction, whether in actual fact in our hearts we recognise the harm and we don't actually want the machines, but is it an evil that we have to put up with? But in my experience, doing this policy again for the 9th time is not going to achieve what members around the table are wanting to achieve. I don't have the answer. I wish that I did, but yeah, that's where I'm sitting at this point in time.
Okay, thank you, Councillor O'Leary. Councillor Henry?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I didn't know that you had discussed it 8 times. That's quite a lot, but that just shows there's something not quite right and something has to change. I just see with the motion, I see we are showing leadership, and that this is, gambling has been a problem for a long time, and it's could become or is becoming a bigger problem anyway. But I just want to say, whatever Peter Dunn is for, I'm against, so I'm sticking with the motion.
That makes life simple. Councillor Tooman.
The way I see it, Madam Chair, is life is really full of choices. We've talked here today about the evils of gambling. Actually, I would put alcohol at the top of the list, not actually gambling, because over many years, I think alcohol has caused more problems to me than has the gambling. Not as an intake, of course. There's so many things in our community. Of course, we've got alcohol, we've got gambling, we've got the psychoactive substances, and I think 9 people died last month in Auckland. We've got Lotto, which runs on a Wednesday and a Saturday. We've got our TAB, where we bet who's going to win the Super 12 and who's going to win the tests and all those sort of things. When I break it all down, the council have actually received $27,857 for our playgrounds over a period of 7 years, and that's actually excluding the Seddon Park upgrade and the museum exhibition. This one here causes a bit of grief as far as I'm concerned, and I think we probably have to eventually make a stand, and by saying that we will not get children's playgrounds because we're not actually taking any money from these poker machines. It's only $27,000 a year. Surely we can come up with $27,000 a year. So as a result of that, of course, I will be supporting the motion.
Just a point of clarification, I didn't say that. I said we need to find alternatives if we don't take the money.
Well, we've got the annual plan coming up.
Which I hope we will look at.
And the 10-year plan.
Yeah, agree. Okay, so we've been through the discussion. Oh, right of reply, Mayor Andrew.
Yep, I'll take that. We may have looked at this 9 times in the last 7 years, but my understanding is that we've never had a true sinking lid policy. Of course, I've got an open mind, but and I'll listen to all the arguments when it comes up, but we have never got to the true sinking lid policy. Every time we've been diverted at the 11th hour. In the last term, we did have what was close to a sinking lid policy, came back for a new, it got put back before us again. And a far looser policy got put in place, which is where we are at the moment. Why it would come back again in the same term with the same councillors is for you to decide how that could have happened. gambling may not be the biggest evil. Alcohol probably is a bigger evil in our society, but put the two together, the guy with a pint of beer beside the poker machine, and you've got double jeopardy. So, and they very often go together. The gambling machines are in places that sell alcohol, so licensed premises. So you've got the double thing going there together, which isn't ideal. And this council may have only taken $50,000 a year, but $50,000 a year is a huge amount of money for some of the smaller places out there where we've taken that money off them. Our kids will still get our playgrounds. That's our job. That's what we do. And if it really came down to it, and this seems to be where the conversation has surrounded, if it's a choice between going home and having your dad at home and watching a movie with him on TV, or kicking a ball in the backyard without a playground, or the playground, I know I'd rather go home. I would have rather have gone home and kicked the ball around with my son on the back lawn, with my father on the back lawn, and not had the playground down the road. But we can have both. We can have the playground down the road, and we can have dad at home kicking the ball around with the son, or mum kicking the ball around, you know, a family back at home, instead of an addiction to a poker machine. 50% of the harm from gambling in this country is done from poker machines outside of casinos. That's a huge figure. So that's outside of lotto, that's outside of your casinos, that's outside of all gambling. In this country, 50% of the harm from gambling is done through the one-armed bandit. And that's not good enough. We are the regulators. We set the policy. We can do something about that today. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to voting, please. Yeah, you're voting for or against the amendment.
The amendment is lost.
There you go. And now we're voting equally for or against the motion. Yeah.
The motion is carried.
Okay, thank you, councillors. Brings us to the next report, which I guess is let Helen have an introduction to. It's going to be quite changed now.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it is unfortunate that these two reports came up together, but we were prepared for the conversation that was going to be had. So the reason that it did come forward, there is a resolution to bring the design of the playgrounds in Rotatuna to the September Community and Services Committee meeting, and at that time to also bring the funding strategy. And working on the funding strategy, we identified that, you know, with our planning, that we needed to get started on that early. So we did bring that to this meeting. Given the resolution that's just been passed, I'd suggest that our new recommendation, as the staff recommendation, would be that it would just state A. So approves the external funding plan for the Flagstaff Playgrounds project, excluding applications to gaming trust funds, and then would remove the resolutions that would have been required for those applications. It does mean that we will attempt within with the strategy that we have to raise a target of however, you know, what we can. So we'll work with the the funding opportunities that we have, and also working with the community out there and through sponsorship, and also just speaking with the Parks and Open Spaces staff that we do have a budget, and so the design of the playground will reflect the ability to scope according to the existing budget and any sponsorship or funding raised.
Thank you, Helen. I might lead off with the first question, if I might. I haven't got any other names for questions. Really happy to hear, Andrew, that you're pretty certain that we can find the money for these playgrounds from an alternative source. Just asking the relevant person, where do are you confident that you can find this money and get these projects done on time from other places? If so, I'd also like to understand when you do find that money, where it's come from and what else may or may not be getting done as a result. Just for transparency is mainly it, because I'm confident we can all agree to find the money. Where would it come from?
I can.
So yes, at this point, I would acknowledge that it will be difficult to find that level of funding outside of the Gaming Trust. Not impossible. We will need to review our funding plan, obviously, and as Helen has said, it may result in a rescope of the work to deliver the projects within the budget. And that is largely to do with the timeframes, as you've alluded to, Paula. We have to deliver this within the current financial year.
So we've got to find that alternative money within the financial year. Look, I really hope we do. That's my goal. If we don't have to rely on that sort of source of money, all the better.
So we're going to be bringing back concepts to the 19th of September committee meeting. And at that point, you'll get to see more detail about what we would be proposing, and we will have had an opportunity to look at our funding sources.
And so it would be identified to us at the time.
Absolutely.
What wasn't going to be done or might be delayed if that came to that.
Yes.
If it came to that.
Yeah. So you're probably going to have two opportunities to look at playgrounds. We've got the LTP briefing Monday to look at playgrounds going forward, and then we will obviously have to work on this current year's playground.
Well, okay, I'm going to remain optimistic because this community's waited a long time. Councillor McPherson. Councillor McPherson, your turn.
Making some rather pejorative speeches on this because you're unhappy with the result of the last motion, I'd suggest. I think you should be just asking questions when it's question time. So the question that I've got is the playgrounds that this council has developed in the last 20 years, how many of them have been developed without pokey money or without gambling money, but with money from outside community organisations? I'm thinking of ones like the Potters Playground, the one in Claudelands Park, the one on the Tills Lookout one, all those ones that have had money from, for instance, Lions Club, not Lion Foundation, but Lions, the service organisation, and other outside organisations. I'd like some information on that, because my concern is that the chair is expressing the difficulty of finding funding as a staff, when I believe that we've traditionally gone to outside sources regardless of whether or not we've been applying to for pokey money.
So I'll have to get the detail on exactly what the costs are around that.
So would we be able to have that for Monday? Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
I will do my very best, but if not, definitely in the 19th of September. And I guess it's a good place to acknowledge that there are differences in destination playgrounds. You know, you look at Dominion Park as a destination, you look at Minogue Park as a destination. They look very different. So it is still possible to deliver destination playgrounds of a high quality for a lesser value, but there will be an acknowledgement that there is less equipment potentially.
And Potter's Playground was largely redeveloped with outside money that wasn't gambling money, wasn't it?
Yes, and probably not what you would call a true destination playground, in the sense that it doesn't have a lot of play equipment in it. It's a children's garden rather than... But yes, I believe you're right.
I think I could say that my grandchildren like that best of all the ones so far.
So I guess... Oh, sorry.
Process. I'm just wondering, given that the attachment 1 is the external funding plan that staff have worked on, whether we defer this item to give them time to update that and come back?
We don't need any resolutions, eh?
Is that an idea?
No, that's fine. The only reason we brought it to this meeting was because of the resolution requirement, so we can bring that back with the September report.
Good, so you make a procedural motion that we...
No, not September.
No?
Look, I think it would be helpful, because we'd need to see a new funding plan, so that would...
Which would answer some of our questions, perhaps. But it is a procedural motion that it be lie on the table pending. Give me the 3.1.1, isn't it, or something?
There is one potential application to Well Energy that would still be relevant in this funding plan. their closing date is the 29th of September. So if we were to bring that back in the 19th of September, it would potentially only give us a week to put together a quality application for submission.
Is that
an insurmountable problem there?
Yeah, so the recommendation adding on that, but like, if you were to approve the funding strategy as it is, and we'd also look for other sources of funding, which we could still bring back later, but it would assist staff to approve what's in it, excluding the gaming trust applications.
Okay, no, look, that's fine. I was just trying to look for a common sense way forward for everyone. So no, I'll withdraw my procedural motion.
Okay, great.
That's fine.
That was a good idea, but for that little bit. Thank you, Councillor O'Leary. Councillor Pascoe.
Yeah, thank you. I've got questions around the development of the playgrounds. Have you involved the North East Community Trust in your discussions around because my understanding was that the Tahuia playground was the next destination playground, and this report suggests that that's now becoming a much lesser playground in favour of Harapuki Drive becoming the bigger of the two.
Yeah, so I suppose the aim of this plan was for a bit of transparency. So we wanted to bring forward a plan that was trying to diversify how we were raising the funds for our destination playgrounds. So in the actual funding plan, we are looking to community groups. We have started discussions with potential community groups like Rotary and the Trust.
I was thinking not necessarily of funding, but of agreement that this is what the community wants. Because I suspect, I get the feeling, being a Flagstaff resident myself now, that they feel like things happen, well, when things do happen out there, which according to them is quite rare, often they haven't been consulted in the first place, and it happens. And whilst they appreciate what's going on, my next part of the question was around a lady called Katie King, who of course has been the crusader for the Tahuia Drive playground, and whether or not she's been involved in any discussions that you've had in terms of where the playground plan might land.
Yes, so absolutely. Katie King has been our first port of call in discussions, and she is supportive, as I understand it, of the shift, and understands the reasons why we would move the destination or the larger playground to Haripuki.
Okay.
And we are meeting with her again this week to further those discussions.
Okay, so given the outcome of the last report, and you cover this off very briefly in paragraph 14 about the Sylvester School Establishment Board, is there an opportunity now to get a little bit more serious with them? And I'm looking at the Deanwell model where we had the MOE, we had Downers as a funding partner, and we had HCC who went in and put together a more than modest playground, which fitted what the school needed. And I appreciate Sylvester Road is going to be a little more complicated because it's one of these PPP bills, so it's a little bit more complicated than the ministry and the ownership and all of the other bits and pieces. But is there an opportunity now to perhaps get a little more serious with Sylvester Road, with Sylvester School, to do something there where we might have a good chance of tapping the likes of Downer on the shoulder again, who I don't think anyone around the table will feel in the slightest bit compromised with, for a little bit of funding along with the ministry?
Yeah, so absolutely. We've been in discussions with this Sylvester School, and you mentioned the PPP build, which makes it slightly more complicated. So they haven't been able to commit an actual figure that they would bring to the table, but they're talking about a partnership in terms of more shared facilities to bring to the table, and we can further those discussions.
Can we fit that within the timeline that we've got, given the promise that we've made to the community, and you know where that original destination playground currently sits on our sort of 10-year plan?
Yeah, so I guess that's where the detail will come on the 19th of September in terms of the funding, the project delivery, and all those nuts and bolts will fit into that report
Okay. In the 10-year plan, how much have we got actually allocated, you know, given that we're what, about 200,000 short now? Is it 250,000 short, or not quite 250, depending on the well energy funding? What have we actually got in our 10-year plan allocated for what was originally the Tahuia destination playground?
So, oh gosh, have we got that?
It's 960,000 over the two parks, and that includes toilet at Tahuia, not Tahuia, Haripoki.
Haripoki.
Okay. So 960 is sitting
Over
in
the
the
two
10
parks.
in the 10 over 2 years.
No, over the two for Tahuia and.
So we've got 960. We need, according to this, 1156, don't we? 1.156 million, according to paragraph 17, or 1.16 million. So we're about 200 short, aren't we? About 200,000 short at this stage,
Yes.
in terms of what that funding cost is. So you think you could deliver both playgrounds for $200,000 less if there's no external funding involved?
We can deliver 2 playgrounds. They will be lesser.
They will fit the they'll fit the bill in terms of cost.
Basically, for this financial year, we have. I mean, the community has expectations, and my understanding is that we will need to reshape, and rescope to deliver. And that's what the 19th of September is about, is informing you of what we're proposing.
Okay, okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pascoe. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'm just glad to hear you're talking to Rotary and hopefully Lions Club as well and so on. They do love giving money, and especially for things like that. One thing, it's not just about giving money. For me, it's also about where can we save some money in different ways now. And I harp on about that all the time because it's about community involvement and so on. Do we use people who have to do community service for things like that? I mean, there's a lot of saving and a lot could be done because they usually have got quite a few muscles. Not much in the brain, but you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah.
It can be an awful lot of work to pull together that sort of resource in terms of the safety requirements and managing the resource. Not saying that we can't do it, just saying that it can create a lot of work for staff to pull all of that together. So certainly in the future, as we get more inventive about how we do things, we will need to be considering options.
Again, and just the playground equipment is often very bespoke equipment, so it does require, you know, it's not just anyone that can go in and build it. If you were building, a wooden structure, then, you know, potentially there are probably aspects of it that you can build. But in terms of a themed playground, often it's, you know, it is bespoke equipment, and it is. Maria inferred the health and safety requirements, and particularly council's obligations around our health and safety requirements and contracts is, you know, we have to be very mindful of that.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, I'm just thinking of fences and stuff like that around it even. I mean, that's something more simple. Looking at the simpler things. So I just know that businesses also give certain amount of hours to charitable work. So just using that could there be a possibility looking at what's the simpler things that could be done with outside help?
And definitely within the funding strategy itself, it talks about sponsorship and community engagement. So those are things that we will be looking at as part of that. And Katie and her team have, you know, shown some enthusiasm around supporting.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Bunting.
Thanks, Chair. Can you just give me a little bit of information on the policy on signage and things like that? So if Rotary, I know at Claudens have done a shelter or something, they've got a sign there, but that's the only Rotary sign I can think of seeing. And I'm thinking if we got the likes of Downers to fund it and the likes, do we have a policy on signage in playgrounds or what we can offer them in recognition?
I don't believe there's a policy specific to signage in playgrounds, and certainly if you look at the Potter's Children Garden, there's
Yeah,
references.
true.
So
Good
where
point.
people have provided sponsorship, it is possible.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that we can do everything we possibly can to make it as attractive as we possibly can to fund it.
And of course, I guess that's balanced with providing a park rather than signage everywhere.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not sort of thinking,
Aesthetics, yeah.
you know, King's Cars type signs. I'm talking sort of, you know,
I
just.
think we've done pretty well with the Hamilton Gardens and the destination playground there. So
Yeah.
the Hamilton Gardens are, you know, put some really good signage up and acknowledgement
Yeah.
of the support they've received from the gardens itself, but also the destination playground. So we'd absolutely work with the businesses and the community to ensure
Great.
that we come to, you know, something that's relevant to acknowledge how they support the project.
Sweet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'd better move on to the voting. Is there a mover or a seconder? Councillor, are you moving? Councillor Casson, Councillor Bunting. Would you like to speak to it in any way? Anybody needs to debate this? No debate? No debate from the mover? Seconder? No?
No, look, I just, go for it. Good luck. You know, we've changed the game on you, you know, recently. But I have full confidence that we'll come up with something very, very cool. So good luck. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else would like to make a comment on this before we put it to the vote? No? Okay, we're voting.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Okay, oh, sorry, councillors, we are going to take a 10 minutes break because we've been sitting for 2 hours. We'll be back in no later than 10:02. Sorry, Sean, I know you've been waiting all day, but we'll get a stiff coffee in, everyone, and we'll be back. sorry, we're just going to get going because of the time of the day. And so we are now up to the item 12, which is the Event Sponsorship Fund, on page 76. Sean's going to say some pertinent things, but we are assuming,
Pressure's on.
Yeah. And I think you should have 100% confidence that we've read this, Sean. And but just to put a little bit of a context around it, we must remember, of course, that we already made the decision to allow, when we did the process, we already made the decision to allow Sean to assess and prioritise the applications. And this is where this report has come from. So I hope we don't go into trying to reassess applications, but just to address our questions so that we fully understand why Sean has put these recommendations up to us. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, thank you, Chair. If I could just make a few introductory comments to it. As I said at the time that we had a briefing on the event sponsorship policy and the process we're going, this is the first time in a number of years, or the only time I'm aware of, where we've considered these applications in an open forum. It's important just to remind you that the decision-making around the event sponsorship applications is guided quite heavily by the council policy, and the key items in that policy revolve around our support for events that deliver high profile and positive profile for the city, generation of overnight stay, and also business opportunity for the city, the number of people that are participating, particularly from out of town, but also the number of people from Hamilton and the wider Waikato that participate, as well as utilising or enhancing the various assets that the city has for staging major events. And that's not limited to venues as such. That includes a lot of our public places and so on. The one thing I'd like to just also remind you of is that any approval that's made here will always be subject to the satisfactory evidence from applicants that they have received other income that they need to secure to stage the event. So we are one of a number of sponsors for many people, so whilst we might approve a sponsorship, we don't actually make payment until we have evidence that the full funds required have been secured by the event operator, and equally that they're subject to a contract for the deliverables and for the outcomes that they promise as a part of their application and that are required as a part of our approval process. What's interesting this year is that, and it's for me personally, I think it's quite it's a good news story. We've had a number of applications and conversations over the last several months with organisations that are nationally based, looking to hold national competition and events here in Hamilton, and certainly in my time since I've been involved with the city here, there hasn't been a lot of that type of activity coming to us. So you heard from the people from the National Brass Band Championships this morning. We've been in discussions with hockey, we've been in discussion with marching, and there's a few other things to come separate to this agenda item. But it is quite good to see that national event, competition event especially, coming together, because they do bring big numbers of New Zealanders to us, and obviously give us quite a bit of opportunity in lifting our profile. The Athletics Champs is another example, using Porritt Stadium, which ran very successfully this year and will do so again. So I'm quite heartened by that change, and it's a sector of the market that I believe we should be working to target more fully for a whole range of good reasons. The recommendations that we have refers to Christmas sponsorship, which has been something that the council has done for many, many years. You'll note in the recommendations and from our discussion at the briefing on this that we are proposing that the council funding that we do each year through the Event Sponsorship Fund be approved and continued for the next 2 years, so there's certainty for the organisers, but also that because it doesn't rest as easy as other applications do with regards economic return or generation of overnight stay, it is very much a city type of activity for the community, that we actually move the Christmas funding in a technical sense across to the Marketing and Communications Department of Council, who look after a lot of city-type community-based events, events that might take place in Garden Place, things like Anzac Parade and so forth, and it's just going to be a better fit. So our proposal is actually to put Christmas into what I think is a more comfortable home, but it's still for it to be funded on an ongoing basis, but through that other department of council. And I know we have Karen Watkins who organises Christmas here, and although it's out of season, I see she's also brought Santa Claus with her as well. The other thing I'd just like to mention as well, and it's one of the items came up, or a couple of items came up in other agenda items today that I thought were relevant. One is the visibility of council support, which Councillor Gallagher raised in another agenda item earlier on. All of our terms with applicants and the contract arrangements, we require the organisers to give a reasonable amount of voice or visibility to council support in the event, and to be highlighted as an event sponsor and contributor. Historically, this has varied a little bit according to how big a sponsor we are. So it's sort of important to bear in mind that in some cases we are a primary sponsor, in some cases we are one sponsor of many, and in fact might even be a sort of minor, relatively minor or medium scale sponsor compared to other sponsors who are contributing towards the events. There has always been a bit of a debate that we've had over the years, which I think might be settled, as to do we push the Hamilton City Council identification and logo, or do we push the word Hamilton that came out of the V8s? And there's always been debate around that, but we've increasingly moved, and I would like to suggest we would move fully to having Hamilton City Council being the identifier for sponsorship support, as opposed to just that name of the city itself, or that logo for the city. The other thing I'd like to mention as well, and I'll promise not to talk too much after that, is this year is the first time in a number of years where we have some applicants who are actually using Claudelands as a venue. Historically, we used to have a number of sponsored events that used Claudelands. With the cutback in the budgets, those events had suffered from not getting any ongoing support from council with the various budget cuts we've had. But this is the first year in a few years where we've got a couple of events, and I'm thinking of the Brass Band Championships and the National Marching Championships, that will use Claudelands as their primary venues. I have always taken a great deal of care to keep the arrangements that we make between our venues at H3 and, let's say, Claudelands in this instance, and the event sponsorship fund at arm's length. I've never wanted the event sponsorship fund to be seen to be a fund that sort of subsidises or cross-funds income to Claudelands, and I would like to impress upon you that I'm doing my best to try and keep a degree of separation. Having said that, the arrangements that we have come to independent of the sponsorship applications that we've since received with Claudelands for both of those events, we have actually looked after them reasonably well. And whilst there is a cost to them for using our venue, a big chunk of that cost is actually taken up by what I would refer to as on costs, where we have to pay for staff time on a full recovery basis, or get the services or rent equipment from other sources. So I just sort of make that comment on that. So other than that, if I may, I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm in your hands.
Thank you, Sean. I see there are some questions. And councillors, just so you know, because this is also quite a meaty bunch of recommendations, I'll probably put 3, 4 and 5 separately, but that may be useful at that time. Yeah. Councillor Taylor.
Oh yes, Sean, look, you've actually partially answered my question anyway. It was just in regard to the Christmas event, which we all know is a fabulous event, and the fact that when I look at the management assessment, it's well below some of the other events that got declined, and you've explained that it's probably in the wrong basket, basically. So I mean, because obviously there's the issue of how this looks to some of the competing events as well. So will this, in future years, it won't be in this basket at all, so it won't have that management assessment, or?
Yeah, that's correct. In future years, it'll be part of the city events suite that's supported through the marketing and communications operation.
Thank you.
So that's hence the resolution to actually remove Christmas and the funding to go with it into a different basket.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we've had a previous discussion about that in general. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, and thank you for explaining the Christmas thing too. That was one of my questions as well. I just want to question the, well, not challenge, but get a bit more understanding of some of the rankings of, for example, the marching championships on page 89. You've put the number of anticipated participants sort of up there with almost with balloons and the Hamilton Gardens Arts Festival. When you say participants, is that people who are coming to town, or is that going to be as big as those events?
The key thing that drove me was the overnight stays. So whilst the balloons and Hamilton Arts Festival and the Gardens are particularly high number and high profile, obviously, the marching championships will actually generate a very, very big number of overnight stays that we know of, because there's a much larger audience and also group of competitors who are coming from all around the country to come and stay. So that really is predicated not about the number of people that go through the turnstile, but the number of people who are actually going to stay for a number of nights and spend money in the city.
Right, and I suppose it's the same for the brass band thing as well, isn't it?
That's correct, and that's why that grouping of these national competitions, I think, is a really good area for us to put more attention into because of that.
What date was the brass bands? Do you remember what date? It's not next year, it's the year after, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's, look, I'll just have a check on the paper.
Which I really applaud you funding a year ahead too. I thought that was really cool.
Yes, well, some of some of these events, that is the following year, but some of these events need plenty of notice and time. And one of the challenges we have, and it was a challenge in our conversation with the people from the brass bands, is they have to go out and do a bid and do a pitch. And in their case, they were doing a pitch for Hamilton to get support nationally to come to Hamilton, but without any certainty from us that they would get some help from us to make it actually happen. So it's a challenging pit, but if we can approve in advance where we can and we have good knowledge, that's a good thing to do.
But they have made the pitch, is that right?
Yes, they've made the pitch and they've been accepted.
Right, without our indicative funding. So, oh, that's okay. I was really interested in your question or your point there about Hamilton and the brand and stuff like that. What did you base that thinking on?
Oh, look, one of the issues with some of the big events is that we get profile for Hamilton, sort of as a result of people seeing it on TV and things. It's a bit like, I arranged for the decal for Hamilton to go on the rugby ground when we got a rugby game. And it was just sort of using the arrangement we have with the event organisers to ensure that Hamilton as a city gets noticed as being the venue and just seen a little bit more. But that had been at the expense of actually identifying in many instances for participants and for people who attend, whether they are from elsewhere around the country or Waikato and Hamilton, to understand that it was actually council that is actually a contributor towards that. And I think there's been a bit of a loss, and I think we've sometimes been a bit inconsistent with how we've treated that over time, and I think it's time for some consistency. And as the gentleman from the brass bands pointed out this morning, they're going to deliver a few opportunities in a different way for us to get the Hamilton message across, because they'll have a live channel for the duration and everything else. So we just need to work at other ways rather than just relying on having a logo stamped on something.
Right, but in that instance, I perhaps would have thought, and I don't want to get into debate about it, but perhaps would have thought the Hamilton brand would be better than the Hamilton City Council brand because it's got more of a national...
Yeah, that's right, but you won't... I think we're just going to try and deliver that in a different way. We'll still get the same result, I think, but there has been confusion. Is Hamilton City Council in it or not in it?
Yeah.
And I think we should be standing up and saying we are.
So it's good to have your perspective on that, Sean. We're not deciding on that today, but great question.
Look, I raise it as a signal, and especially given
so that would come
the
back
Deputy
to us.
Mayor's comments.
Yeah.
Is
that
it, so
comes back
could I
to the
ask
association.
the
Yep.
chair then perhaps where we would have that discussion, because it's probably something we need to
Richard,
tidy up?
listening.
I was asking a really pertinent question actually. It's just
Yeah, where would we have a wider global branding conversation?
If
what
I
you're saying.
may, Mr. CEO, is that okay if I comment? Yeah, look, we have had a request for us to discuss that in context of the work that Hamilton Waikato Tourism are doing, and they're campaigning into the future, and they're doing quite a big piece of work on a brand strategy for their territory, and we're involved with that, and I think the conversation that comes out of that will be the time for us to talk about Hamilton identification and so forth.
Timescale on that, Sean?
I think they're hoping to have something around October this year for us.
So that's when we would have
So I
that.
think it'll be a good time to bring that
Sorry.
in.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Have you finished?
Thanks.
Cool. Mayor King.
Yeah, I was just going to go in the exact same place as you were on the name. You don't see Whangarei City Council, you just see Whangarei. You see Wellington, you don't see Wellington City Council or Dunedin City Council. And there's just one thing I've learnt from spending millions of dollars on advertising, is when the person who's paying for the advertising is sick of it, doesn't mean the public are. They're just getting used to it. And I know it's been around for 10 years, but I just think the public recognise that, and if you're going to start again, and anyway, it'll come up in discussion later. But I just that one line, when the advertiser's sick of it, that doesn't mean the public are.
Totally agree.
So I'd rather not, just
Okay.
no offence, I don't really
No,
want
it's
to cut
fine.
anybody off. This is an important conversation. We just haven't got time for it today. So let's get to the questions on the report. Councillor Pascoe.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Questions. First question is around the Gardens Festival. Should we be making it very clear that our sponsorship level to the Gardens Festival is around about $195,000 rather than the $130,000 that we write the cheque out, given that there's about $65,000 worth of free infrastructure that they get the benefit from?
Yes, we are very clear on that, and the organisers are extremely clear on the totality of that value. The 65,000 is a estimated in-kind amount.
Appreciate
that.
that.
We're very, very clear on that, as are the organisers and their.
So are we the major sponsor for the Gardens Festival?
No, we're not the major sponsor. I think I'd have to look up the application.
No, that's okay. I suppose
we're,
in terms of dollars, they need to recognise the fact that it is net closer to 200,000 rather than the 130 that we write the cheque out for.
There are a couple of other cash sponsors that are close to our cash level.
Our cash
as
level,
well,
yep,
and
okay.
there are a number of other sponsors that also provide a lot of in-kind services as well.
Right, okay. Balloons over Waikato, you mentioned that we're one of 4 funders. I assume another funder will be Zuru, who've got the naming rights.
Correct.
Who are the other 2? Do we know?
Well Trust.
Well Trust, yep.
I'll have a look.
I suppose, cut to the chase, none of our other LGAs are supportive of balloons over Waikato, which of course is what the event is called. I'm sticking with Deputy Mayor Gallagher on that, but I assume that we are the major local government funder for balloons over Waikato.
We're a major funder, but yes, in terms of local government, absolutely.
Okay. And then that brings me to the third question, which really wraps up the earlier 2. Do we encourage, in the 4 years I've been on council, the 3 major recipients have been Christmas, Gardens Festival and balloons. They're all magnificent events and they bring crowds and they're really great to go to and good feel about the city. But they are very mature events too. Are we encouraging them to become less dependent on us as a major funder, given that they have got opportunities now, given their maturity, to go out to the market, as perhaps balloons have done with Zuru, for example, who might not have been there at the time when they first started up, and saying, hey, we perhaps can take less funding off the City Council, given that we we can get it elsewhere?
Look, yes, we do, and the I have to say there are often in my office, or if I go to see them, nervous discussions about where our funding level is going to be in the future. These events, yes, they have been around forever. A number of them have longevity, but they do still struggle to get funding support, and we've tried to assist in some cases. With Garden Arts Festival in particular, we've been working up in Auckland with a couple of contacts to see if we can pull something together. It hasn't been easy, but yes, they know that they have to reduce, if they can, their reliance on council support, but it is not easy. In the case of Balloons over Waikato, they did previously have a named sponsor, and Zuru came in at the 11th hour and basically saved their bacon.
Okay, so they weren't a new opportunity for them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess there's a whole bunch more money coming from the Gaming Trust now that we're not applying for, that they can go out and seek, I guess. But thank you for answering my questions.
Okay, so let's move into the staff recommendation. I'll take it in parts unless we feel confident that we can get it through all in one hit. But well, let's go for 3 first, which is approving the applications, Hamilton Garden Festival, balloons, marching and Christmas. Is there a mover? Councillor Casson, Councillor Bunting. Any question, any debate or comments? Just number 3, A, B and C. Is that all right? James?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Hey, look, I've had a bit of association with marching in Hamilton. I don't anymore, but I did. I used to, didn't march myself. Well, I did actually.
I was just picturing you.
Yeah. Little tight skirt. I managed a under-12 team, the Ralph Rake Cavaliers, who were New Zealand champions 2 years running. And look, they were originally, the New Zealand marching champs were originally going to be going to Mystery Creek, and since that's been renegotiated and they've come to the Claudens Event Centre, which is pretty cool because, just to answer some questions, you had Mark about what will they bring to the city. Now, last time when I attended in 2016, they filled the North Shore Event Centre. We had it up there. There were 50 odd teams, average of around about 14, 15 girls or women per team. So you've got the under-12s, under-16s, seniors and your masters as well. And it's like a 2-day comp, but most of the teams arrive around about 4 to 5 days prior to. So you've got all those bed nights as well prior to, and all the teams are staying here in Hamilton. So there's actually quite a few bed nights. And the amount of spectators they bring with them from right down from the bottom of the South Island and Invercargill right up to North Auckland. There's a lot of people that come here, so it's actually a really cool event that they'll drag a lot of people into Hamilton, and it'll be a worthwhile event for Hamilton to have. So I'm really pretty happy to see they've got some sponsorship or some money put towards them here.
Thank you. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you. I echo James's support, obviously, and particularly pleased for Christmas, seeing that there's 2 years there, or the Christmas Trust, seeing that there's 2 years there and we can really leverage that well. I know there's some challenges coming up for them, and I wish them all the very best for that. Balloons, it's an iconic event. We're by no means the biggest sponsor of that, actually, strangely enough. There's some massive sponsors around there, and they do struggle, and I know they have been doing some funded studies to see how they can take it to the next level, so it could get even bigger. I've always worried with balloons, though, that it is so weather dependent, and while Nightglow's normally well attended, the balloons often sort of take off over Te Awamutu, and that's the end of it. So I have got an eye on that, but I'll be interested to see what they come up with. But regards Christmas, 'twas the night before Christmas, and all the retailers, thank you for your support, especially Jeff Taylor. Because I know he hates Christmas. All into it.
Okay. We're not quite sure what that means, but we're not going to ask. Councillor Pascoe.
Yes, Chair, I'm supporting the motion. you know, I support the event sponsorship fund, but I think that on the basis that it encourages activities that benefit the city, but I think council's role in it should be as an enabler. I get a little bit concerned that it's same old each year, that it's the same 3 groups who I mentioned before I really support and I attend. But we should be encouraging these groups to become self-supporting, and I know that's not as easy to do as it is to say, but if we can do that, then it allows us to repeat that seed funding that obviously we gave those groups back in their infancy, so that we can encourage new events to come, whether they're permanent new events or they are those one-off national championships that come to Hamilton. So I'd like, if anything, to send a clear message that, you know, we would like to see those groups finding other ways to seek funding, or see a sinking lid, that word's been used a bit this afternoon, a sinking lid policy on the level of funding, given that will encourage them to go out and seek funds elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor King, and then I might make a comment. Mayor King.
Yeah, I just want to congratulate Hamilton Christmas events, the Hamilton Gardens Art Festival and the balloons over Waikato. These are hugely driven by volunteers, massive volunteer hours, and I just couldn't work without the volunteers and the groups and the individuals who get in behind us. So I just a shout out to volunteers in general, and 3 out of every 10 New Zealanders volunteers somewhere, and that's what keeps this country going on the sports, on social areas, churches, groups, clubs, and and that's why these events work. We tip a little bit of money in, but it's the volunteers, and you can't measure the value that comes through from the volunteers for these. Thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't going to start with this, but I support Mayor Andrews' comments on volunteers. We're very blessed in Hamilton with the amount of volunteerism across a number of sectors, but they do need resources to be beyond the volunteers. This is where the money comes in. Quite often they need to be coordinated, or they need the resources to help them undertake their job. Look, I'm very happy with this recommendation for a number of reasons, notwithstanding the views that you made, Councillor Pascoe, about trying to encourage people to be self-sufficient. I think what we've got here is a blend of a number of iconic events which we can't let fail, because they do attract people, because they are trying to go from strength to strength. And that's how I see the Hamilton Summer Festival, which is top-notch, and also the balloons. And on a good year, it's fantastic. Sometimes the weather is a little unkind, but there's always very good elements around that event. Christmas, let me just say I fully support your move, Sean, to move it elsewhere, because it's something that council should do. What council around New Zealand doesn't run a Christmas event for its people? We certainly don't want to be the bar humbug capital of New Zealand. So we've got to do, you know, something that's good for the community at Christmas time. We also have to be mindful that we've got other communities that need our support, and that's probably where the small scale grants become even more important in terms of quantum. How do we allow them to celebrate their significant cultural events as well? So I just want to keep an eye on that in the LTP, to be honest, to make sure that we've got sufficient money, so we're not scrapping over a meagre amount, but we've got the amount we need to let the community tick over. So on that note, I'm happy to support the recommendation 3, and we'll go to the vote if no one else has any comments. Vote, please. Thank you.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Excellent. So now we'll move to number 4, which contains hockey, marching, and the approval of the Christmas budget going across, which we've already discussed. So is there any new... No, I did them in parts, but... Well, so this should be very quick then. I'm doing number 4, and we won't have... we won't rehab the conversation. Oh, no, I didn't know if I got broad agreement. So anyway, let's vote for number 4, please, if there's no need for further discussion, I guess. Yep. Oh, yep, all right, let's do that. 4 and 5. We're voting for 4 and 5, councillors. Anybody want to say anything? Speak now or don't. Okay, voting. Thank you. Four and 5, pages 77.
Oh.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Hang on, stop. My mistake. We didn't have a mover and a seconder for those ones. Can I take the mover and seconder of the first? Thank you, and quiet, retrospectively just did. Sorry. It's been a long day. A mistake at the end of the day. All right, thank you, everyone. That moves us on now to item 13, lucky for some, which is the Civil Defence Emergency, which is a routine report to us, and we should have read. So we're going to take it as read. Calvin, you're welcome to say any really quick, pertinent points you feel need to be raised. Otherwise, we'll take questions.
I have nothing further to add. Can be taken as read. It's just an introduction. I'm sure everyone's already met Lee Hazelwood, the Group's Civil Defence Controller. It's his report, and we'll take any questions.
Lee, have you got anything you would like to say in a few short words?
No, just the fact that we feel that we're making great progress since we've adopted the programme.
Thank you. We're looking at the window because we can see it from our window, and looking at the good progress is really good. And can't remember who it was, but one of our councillors here had a really good idea that we come and visit you in the new building. And that was whoever had the idea, who can't remember, was an excellent idea. We look forward to coming to see you there. So we'll take the voting on if there aren't any questions. Oh, have I got discussion? Sorry, wrong tab up. Apologies, Mayor Andrew.
I'll move.
Oh. Kate Macking, Bunty seconded. That's all right, fine, whichever. Mayor King, Councillor Tooman has seconded. Any discussion? Councillor, yeah, getting there. Councillor O'Leary.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
So it's such a tiny screen.
Just a question on page, I guess, 3 and 4, but it's just on the community engagement and something that we raised in the previous term in the subcommittee. I noticed you got a list there that those following groups, I guess you're approaching to build in how they would respond and however the community plans would work in terms of in the event of an emergency. The only one on there that I feel is really on the ground and people would turn to in the community is the Western Community Centre, and that was something that I raised, and so did Councillor McPherson and Councillor Tooman. You know, that those are the actual people that are connected to such a huge amount of a huge number of residents and in their communities, and there's more than just the Western Community Centre. So, you know, I mean, Department of Corrections don't have an office where people would rock up in the event of an emergency to say, help me, what do I do? So I'm just, that list is a little bit lacklustre for me. Can you shed some light on actually what we're doing?
So I'll just take a couple of them as an example. So Waikato University, for example, large student population who all have 3 or 4 members of their family, plus the hundreds of employees and their family members. So we typically approach, in addition to community groups, large institutions and organisations and companies to be able to reach out through their staff. So that's one example there. And likewise with Wintec. The community centre is our pilot programme. So we're working a programme with them, see how it goes, get the feedback and the pros and cons of the way we've approached it before we move on to other communities. The corrections is when we look at who we need to deal with after an emergency, those who are well prepared, well informed, often can look after themselves to a certain degree. The sort of people that come out of corrections institutions are not necessarily people who are well prepared, but they're the people that we have to and are obligated to respond to. So if we can give them some degree of resilience before they enter back into the community, it's a burden we don't have to deal with at a later date. By way of example, and there's a few others that fall into that. The early settlement, the settlement centre, we've been reaching out to various different groups, particularly those who we target in as high-risk groups or higher-risk groups, let's say. maybe because they don't necessarily have the networks in the area. The police, obviously, our engagement with the police.
You don't need to explain that one.
That's more to do with, actually, it's probably not what you think it is. That's not to do with our coordination and emergency response we do anything. What that is to look for leverage, because the police have engagement groups of their own. So rather than recreating the wheel, we're actually trying to dovetail into some of theirs.
Okay, so thanks for that explanation. I guess your answer to my concern is that the Western Community Centre is a trial and a brilliant place to start, you know, not that I'm a Westward councillor or anything, but, and a very well connected and well run centre. So if that particular model, and I don't know what that looks like, goes well, you would be running that out to other neighbourhood centres, because, you know, the neighbourhood centres that are connected into the communities are in the most vulnerable areas, and those are the people that would have the least amount of knowledge, the least amount of resources available to them, the greatest needs. So that's where my concern has always been.
Absolutely, and that will be the trial we'll use. And if you recall at the last meeting, we also said that we'll be reaching out to the councillors, because one of the biggest challenges is trying to identify what a community is. Yep. And so we'll be reaching out at some point. You will get engagement from the probably Justin on our team, and he'll be approaching you for your individual opinions regarding your own areas. And
so when will that trial conclude, and when will you make the decision to reach out to the other centres?
To be honest, I'd have to talk to the person who's running this project. I don't know off the top of my head.
But we'll get updates, Calvin, through...
Every quarter you'll be updated on progress.
Okay,
I would suspect this one will be closed.
I'll keep my eye on that one. Yeah, I'm interested in that. Thank you.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes, I was just wondering if we could get a building costs update for the new building, given the cost overruns that we were told about previously.
Yeah, we in 2 days' time are going to be spending 60 minutes with you, giving you a brief on civil defence, and we'd like to address those matters at that time. We weren't anticipating anything to do with that today, so I don't have those figures with me at this time.
Okay, 2 days. I'll look forward to it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions? Someone happy to move that the... Has been, hasn't it? I haven't got it up here. It's been moved and... Yes. That's right, it was Mayor Andrew and Councillor Tooman. Comments on that? Anybody want to comment? No? All right, we'll go to voting. Thank you.
Motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. We're not doing the regional funding today, are we? We're doing it on the...
We can bring it to the 10th of August. So on the 10th of August briefing, we had a slot for the rest of the EOI leases. Given the time frame, you know, that we'd kind of discussed around that earlier, we can make that a later date and bring this item to that briefing.
Are you guys happy with that?
This Thursday.
It just means we can come at it fresh. It is such an important topic. We'll be able to give it better consideration. Anybody unhappy with that? No. No. Okay. Thank you, Councillor.